Good evening. I'm Jason Liasatis. Thanks for joining me again on Outside the Box. We've got a great guest on this evening. My guest is Paul Craig Roberts, was Associate Editor of Wall Street Journal and Assistant Secretary to Treasury with Ronald Reagan. And Paul's joining me this evening for a follow-up talk. Paul was on with me pre-Brexit, and we're talking about post-Brexit to here. Very serious issue tonight. Thanks for joining me, Paul.
Pleased to.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming on, Paul. I know you're a very busy man. We've had a lot of good feedback from your last show with me, and a lot of people voted to get out because of that. I've had a lot of messages. So I'll kick us down the road as usual, Paul. Very interesting situation now post-Brexit. A lot of people are scared. A lot of people are freaking out. I'm sure you're going to help us tonight understand what's going on. I'll just say a couple of words. The first thing I found was amazing was the audacity of George Osborne to openly threaten to punish the British people, and I think that had a big part to play in him losing the game. Like, how dare you have the temerity to challenge us elites, us people who rule you and frighten you for millennia. And I think the EU, Washington, Osborne, thought that the fear of something worse with people would win them over again, you see, Paul. But people are waking up from the chloroform and the smelling salts. It is in the air. People know now with the internet what they're doing and why they're doing it. And he actually threatened them with a $30 billion threat of cuts should they dare to cross him. Yeah, I love that. And people know now that. And actually, they thought that people would stay on their teat. Because they'd be frightened, It's incredible. And in their prison, amazing. I'll just have a little rant. Like, it's better to stay in the EU with some food and a bed and a roof than chance it and get out of prison, And a lot of people who've got nothing much to lose, have got a lot of debt to in the slavery and working every day with just paying the bills. They're thinking, well, we've got nothing to lose. On top of that, they're realizing that the government in the EU and Washington are unscrupulous people who don't really care about them, So, just a quick thing. I also wanted to say about Farage. I thought that was really funny when he said, listen, it's not the best of three. In England, there's an old thing, Paul, I don't know if you know, that if you lose something or a game, then you can say, right, best of three, and you'll flick a coin 3 times, and whoever wins twice wins. It's not the best of three. I liked also what Patrick Henningsen said on Crosstalk, with Peter Lavelle about the speech that Cameron made in February 2016, talking about we can have the best of both worlds, we can renegotiate Britain's position in a reformed EU. But people aren't that stupid anymore, I don't think. And it's like they think they can change the cells around in a prison, paint the walls some different colour, and call them something else, but it's still prison, okay? So I think they're going to stall Article 50. You're going to tell us about it now. John Pilger gave a great talk about it also. They're going to stall Article 50. What's going to happen, Paul? Cameron also said today that they're not going to do another vote. But I don't think they need to do another vote. I think they will just keep kicking the can down the road, and I think they will help people to think that they're free, and they won't be. So that's my little rant, Paul. What do you think is going to happen? What's going on? Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, the British are a long ways from out. If they go along with this 2-year process, I doubt they'll ever get out, because that's 2 years for Washington to punish Britain economically, and it's 2 years for all the propaganda to be used to beat up the population. They're racist. They've empowered Putin by weakening the EU. They've ruined the economy. So the combination of Washington's economic clout and all of the constant drum of propaganda will probably wear the British down. And of course, this vote is non-binding, and so the Parliament at any time can simply ignore it. Democracy is no longer a feature in the Western world. It's not respected. For example, the president of the EU Parliament, Martin Schulz. Now, of course, the EU Parliament it's not a powerful thing. It's really just a cover for the real rulers, which is the Commission, but they have this sort of parliament to pretend that it's democracy. Well, the president of the EU Parliament said, this is a direct quote, "The British have violated the rules. It is not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its fate."
Wow.
In other words, who are you British thinking you can decide? So I don't expect that Britain will get out. Obama told Cameron before the vote that Britain wouldn't be allowed out, and Kerry, I think, is over there now, no doubt repeating the message. You have to understand. British people need to understand. In fact, all of Europe needs to understand. The EU is a Washington control mechanism. It was a CIA initiative. The whole prospect of the EU was invented in order that Washington would be able to easily control Europe. To try to control all the separate governments, that's a difficult thing. The governments, some of them are somewhat accountable to people. They have political opponents. To try to hold on to Europe by buying and negotiating with what are now 28 separate governments is a big deal, but it's easy for Washington to control the EU. It's just a few people who make the decisions. And so it's very easy for them to be suborned or bribed or just simply controlled. So it's not a European thing. It's a Washington thing. And it's also important to Washington because of NATO. There's been no reason for NATO since the Soviet collapse. But Washington needs it. It's a cover for Washington's aggression. Without NATO, if Washington went around bombing countries the way it did, people would say, oh, this is a war criminal. The members of the government in Washington would not be able to travel abroad. They'd be arrested and put on trial as war criminals. But because they have NATO, they've got the EU and the European governments, they're all part of this. So it's cover. Oh, this is not a war crime. We're bringing freedom and democracy to people, or we're fighting terrorism, or it's always some kind of a cover. And as long as they have NATO, then this cover works. So what Europe faces and what the British face by being in NATO and being in the EU is that Washington is driving them into conflict with Russia. So the direct consequence of the EU and NATO will be World War III. So the happiest thing about the vote to leave is it may encourage other European countries to take the same vote. And if the EU and NATO unravel, the chances for peace go way up because Washington loses its control mechanisms. So that is the most important thing about this. Another very important part of it that simply has not been part of the debate, and I was surprised that the City of London and the Bank of England didn't immediately catch on that the New York banks do not want Britain to exit the EU because the New York banks want to eliminate London as a financial center, as a competitor. Well, people have forgotten, but the way Britain was enticed into the EU, Britain were told, you can keep your currency, you can keep the British pound, you can have your own money, unlike the French and the Germans and the Italians and the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Greeks and the Dutch. Well, That's true. That's how they tricked you in. They got one foot in. But if the vote to leave doesn't get implemented and does not go through and is somehow overturned or simply rejected by the British Parliament, which is certainly possible, then the next pressure will be, well, look, you're part of the EU now. You voted and you changed your mind. You're here with us. And we have a centralized fiscal policy. That means the EU makes your tax and spending decisions and not Parliament. And therefore, you can't have your own money any longer. So it's not going to be possible for the British to be in the EU in the future, in the long run, and keep the pound, because that means they're not in the EU, because the EU is a single political entity with its own currency. And so there's no way you can say, well, I'm in the EU, but I've got my own currency. Jean-Paul Trichet, who was the previous president of the European Central Bank, made this completely clear in his last address. He said, the future for the EU, the next step we take is the centralization of fiscal policies. So, if the Bank of England wants to exist, and if the City of London wants to continue as a financial center, they had better get behind Brexit. They better be supporting leaving, because otherwise there's no longer any role for either, because the European Central Banks will complete the takeover that is part of the political existence of EU. Now, what will Washington do? Well, it will bribe or threaten the various prominent supporters of Brexit. It will also have the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve will have the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan, and these are the three largest currencies in the world: the euro, the yen, the dollar. And they will pound the pound. That is, they will short the pound. They will drive it down. You have to remember what one man did to the British pound some years ago. George Soros. George Soros, all by himself, broke the British pound, made billions of dollars. Well, if George Soros can do that, what do you think the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan can do? They can drive it to zero if they want to. They will also, if they wish, short British stocks. They'll drive down the values of British stocks just by selling them short. So there's going to be a lot of punishment meted out to the British for making this vote, because it's not in Washington's interest for Britain to leave. Washington doesn't care a hoot about what's in Britain's interest. It's Washington that counts. We are the indispensable people, the exceptional people, not the British. And so to think that democracy is going to be respected, of course not. I read you the statement of the President of the European Parliament. There's no respect for your democratic decision making. No American president will have any respect for it. And so the longer it takes England to get out, the less likely it will happen. It's just 2 years is just too long. You'll be punished too severely for 2 years. And people will come to the conclusion that it was a bad decision. So in my view, what should happen is the leaders of this, in fact, Cameron should step down immediately and get out of the way. To stay till October, I mean, there'll be enough punishment by then that the British may change their mind. But what you need to do is to have a new government that says, hey, look, we don't give a hoot about this 2-year business. The British people made a decision. It's now implemented. We're out. It's all over with. There's no negotiation. We're just simply out. Goodbye. And the British should instantly drop the sanctions that the Americans have forced on them against Russia. They should say, yep, no more sanctions. And hook their economy to the rising economies of Russia and China, Iran, India, particularly India, with a long connection, and get part of a different economic mechanism so that they can't be punished, and to take this opportunity to join the rising nations rather than to stay hooked as an American vassal while the American economy and politics collapses. So this is what should be done. There's no time to wait. You've got to get out right away, or you simply won't be permitted to get out.
Bravo, Paul. Thanks so much for that. And let me remind everybody, listen to what Paul's saying, because Paul knows his stuff. He's with Reagan and in the Treasury, you know. And great. I was just going to ask you about that, Paul, about what would happen if UK went or approached Russia and China and Iran, and if they've got something to offer, it could be a symbiotic relationship and get out of the dodgy. Sorry, we were going to say something, Paul. Okay, get out of the dodgy dollar, you know. And leave the American nightmare behind. It's not an American dream, guys. It's American slavery. It's a nightmare. Sorry, Paul. We want to say something.
No, I don't want to say anything. You go ahead.
You know,
I said what I had to say.
It's been an American nightmare. People have talked about this American dream, and it's to spread democracy worldwide and stuff. It's not a democracy, ladies and gentlemen. It's slavery, and the people are realizing that now. Whoever you vote for in England, it's just like being in a restaurant with a few things on the menu, and you know, it's the same thing. And I like what you said about the punishment, Paul, because at last, I've been writing about this and talking about this for years. At last, people are realizing that modern day government, Washington led by, UK led by Washington, it's still like Julius Caesar. It's still the same thing. You dare cross them, you think you're free, but if you cross them and stand up and come out and ask them to leave or demand they leave, I've always said for years that at some point you might get a television broadcast and just someone saying, listen, you were right. It is 1984, George Orwell or whatever, and we are controlling you, and you were right. We are unscrupulous monsters, so shut up and get on with it, get back to work, or we'll punish you even further. So let's not pretend this is a democracy. It's not. And I like the NATO mask thing, Paul. You're right. Washington used NATO as a mask. I've been saying this for a long time. Surrounding Russia. And Putin's just said about, he compared, you might tell me in a minute, he compared what's happening with NATO to what the Nazis did on one of the invasions. And it's like me putting a mask on, Paul, and going out in the street here and starting to kill people and stab people and shoot people. But that's fine because it's not me. It's a mask that says something like NATO on it. It's incredible, you know. And, Ireland said no, didn't they? And then they turned it on Ireland. I'm hoping that's not going to happen here. And Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor of Politics First, I saw what he wrote earlier on. He said in Parliament today, they're all going on about getting out and turning it around, you know. And so yes, and I love what you said about the crowd can't define its own fate. A crowd, they call it crowd. I'm surprised they didn't call them peasants, yeah, because that's
how they're regarded. They're peasants.
Yeah, they don't care about the people.
The elite rule, yeah, peasants.
Say that again, sorry.
The elite rule, and the peasants follow.
That's right, and it's how it's always been over millennia. And just because it looks all a bit more sophisticated now, it's the same thing. So if anything, Paul, I'm delighted that whatever happens, this I believe, and I bang on about this a lot, and I know I overcompensate and over-exaggerate, but I do truly believe this is the beginning of the end of slavery. And I think it's like we're seeing the first steps in the abolition of human slavery. Look at Martin Luther King, Gandhi. It seemed ridiculous at the time, and now I do think we've seen a big change. What do you think will happen if they do try and turn it around, Paul? The people aren't so stupid anymore. They'll see it coming if they're going to try and do some shenanigans down the line. What do you think? There could be riots. Do you think they'll trigger riots to shut people up and have them in queues for bread like they did in Greece? What do you think might happen?
I think they'll discredit the leaders of Brexit. they'll discredit Boris Johnson, whoever the substantial people are who supported leaving, they'll be discredited in some way. And that leaves the voters leaderless. And then the voters will be constantly hit with propaganda about how wrong they are. And then the economy, whether or not Washington pummels it, the media will say, oh, the economy is suffering, the economy is suffering. And that's why you don't have jobs. That's why the social services are cut, and so on and so on. And they will make the people pay such a high price that they'll give up. Now, that's my view of what's going to happen. Now, whether people give up or not, I don't know. It's kind of hard for a mass of people to hold together if the leaders are discredited, if they don't get any airtime, if they can't communicate a message, if they can't reply to the false charges. So I think you're right that people would like to be free of rule by unelected people in Brussels who aren't even British. And I think that's probably true for most of the members of NATO, of the EU. They probably don't really want to be in it. But there's so much propaganda. For example, a lot of the people on the continent probably think, oh, we have to have the EU so the Germans don't dominate us again, or so we don't have wars and fight each other again.
Paul?
This kind of propaganda has been beat in their head for 50 years.
Just a quick thing, Paul. I spoke to a gentleman in Greece on Skype today, a very learned man, and he's saying that a lot of the Greek people are saying that it's like the Nazi takeover again, you know?
Well, as I said, I think in our earlier discussion, if the British wanted to be ruled by foreigners, they could have not fought World War I or World War II. Just let the Germans rule them. So the EU is not a democratic mechanism. It's dictatorship. And there's no accountability for the decision makers. And that's reflected in the quote I gave you from the president of the EU Parliament, Martin Schulz. It's not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its fate. So, in other words, if you're in the EU, you don't have any say about how you're governed. That's the simple fact. And if people still want some form or self-government, at least some input, they'll have to get out. But I don't think Washington is going to let you out. I just don't think you'll be able to get out. I think Washington is too powerful, and that the British people will be suborned, threatened, coerced, bribed. It's going to be a long, hard fight. And the leadership Washington will go after the leadership. So that's why I say, if you really want to get out, you need to say right now that you're out, that there's no 2-year process.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul, very much. Yeah, and again, it's back to that, like David Icke says, isn't it? You know, divide and conquer, problem, reaction, solution. It's very easy to control. I'm not being patronizing to people, but control big crowds, you know, with fear. I could clap my hands on this side of the field and all the sheep run over there. When they run over there, I've got something waiting for them there. I clap my hands here, they run over here. It's very sad. In one sense, I'm very delighted, Paul, that at last the chloroform's lifting and people are realizing with a big shock that they are absolutely controlled by government and Washington. And at the same time, it's a very sad time because when people realize that they're in prison, you know. Sorry, Paul, go on.
Jason.
Yeah.
I don't think they can get out without violence.
It's very honest of you to say that. Very honest of you to say.
If the people are not willing to use violence, they may as well surrender now.
Very honest of you to say that.
That's always the way. You look, it's completely clear. There's no respect for democracy on the part of the political elite. So you can't expect a vote of the people to mean anything to the political elite. It doesn't mean anything. Just to again, Martin Schulz, it is not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its own fate. In other words, we don't care what you voted. It doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. Everyone is telling you this over and over and over. I've heard it scores of times. The vote is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. We're not going to pay any attention to it. And so, if the people don't understand that that's what they're being told, they may as well give up now. But they've been told their vote is meaningless. Again, Martin Schulz, President of the EU Parliament. The British have violated the rules. It is not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its own fate. You know, to say, oh, this is freedom. Ha! It's not. Because your decision is not respected. Democracy has no authority, has no power, unless it's backed up with violence. And all the people who are telling you, oh, we don't care what you voted, we're not going to let go of you. The people are going to have to be prepared to say, is that right? Well, then we're going to drag you out in the streets and hang you off a lamppost. If the people aren't willing to do that, they're not going to get free.
Well said, Paul.
That's simple.
Well
it's always been that simple.
It's the stark reality, isn't it? Absolutely. Thank you.
Stark reality.
It is, Paul. It is. And don't forget, we haven't got guns. Well, there's a lot of people that have got guns here, actually. But people haven't got so many guns here, and there's that added fear from the authorities over where you are, you know. And you know, I've been saying this for years to people that they're not free, and I've been vilified and laughed at. And it's true, and it's here now. This is it, and it is a horrible realization. But I think we will also get people fragmenting into starting their own things. I mean, people are doing it in the US. I mean, I know I had a guy, Quinn Aker, on my show, from the Garden of Eden. They've started planting stuff. They've got a community together, and the SWAT team came and dragged them all away, pulled their crops up. But they're doing it again now. And it seems like we're going to have to go backwards to go forwards, but we're going to have to be forced together to come together and start something new. We've got a couple of things on the go. New Frontiers People's Party. We're starting something. We're doing something. We can't just wait as the prison walls come closer and squash us. We have to do something. So it's a great and exciting time, I believe, Paul. What you know, I mean, I know you've said what they should do. What pressure can people keep up now? That's what I'd like to ask you before we go. We're running out of time. What pressure could people keep up, and in what form? Let's say, other than violence and dragging them onto the streets. Let's say that's Plan B. Yeah. What pressure could people do? Intelligent pressure to keep pressure on to get this going through, because there's a lot of people with a lot of money here now bleating and screaming and saying this is going to affect us, but the people with nothing have got nothing to lose, like Gerald Celente said, and like he said, until people raise their consciousness.
Just a minute, Jason.
Go on, yeah.
Just a minute. You're not listening to me.
Okay.
I've already told you that people with money have the most to lose.
Yes.
The City of London.
Yeah.
You can't define it in that way. You've already bought their propaganda.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, this is the poor and the rich benefit. The City of London, if England doesn't have the British pound, if England is not a financial center, then all that money in the City of London, where is it? Goes nowhere. It's gone. So, and to say, oh, well, we're going to begin new things. They're not going to let you. You'll have to fight them if you want to begin new things. So it doesn't mean that the fight will have to be with weapons, but it's entirely possible. You've got to be willing to go that far. So what can the people do? They can ignore the assaults on their leaders. Or when their leaders, like what did they do to Trump here? The other day, a lawsuit was filed. A woman said, "Oh, he raped me when I was 13 years old." So this is how they come after Trump. You remember how they went after Strauss-Kahn, Dominique Strauss-Kahn?
Yeah, that was big.
They had a hotel maid said, "Oh, he raped me."
Yes.
So they knocked him out of the contention for president of France. It was all false and fake, as it later proved to be. And all the charges had to be dropped. But it succeeded in hurting him and removing him as a challenge for the presidency. So they'll go after Boris Johnson, whoever has helped to lead this, they'll go after these people. And so all the people who voted have got to simply say, "Well, we don't believe you. We know what you're doing. You're eliminating our leaders so you can knuckle us under." You can't simply say, "Oh, we've changed the world now. We have democracy and new things." Baloney. They're not going to let you just because you had a vote. So when they come after the leaders, you'll just have to rush to the defense of them and say, "Quit telling these lies," or "We don't care." Or if it's true, we don't care, because they're doing something more important. Mm-hmm. They're freeing us from EU slavery. So this is, people are going to have to get tough-minded. They're not. They've got to get really tough-minded. And if they don't get tough-minded, then they may as well not have had the vote. Once again, the political elite don't care about the vote. They don't care what you think. They're not going to let it be implemented. The Irish tried. How far did they get? Nowhere. So don't think that this vote has settled anything. The fight is just now going to start. And the longer the British people agree to exit taking, the less the chances of getting out. 2 years, I say you have zero chance of getting out. You'll be so beat up. Your leaders will all be destroyed. Their reputations, or they simply won't be reported. They'll just become non-persons. So, the United States didn't spend over 60 years creating its control mechanisms to let a few British vote it down? Are you kidding? And if the British get out, what does Washington know? Well, the chances are some of the others are, and the whole thing's going to unravel. And all of our work for over 60 years to put Europe under our thumb, and we're going to let one vote destroy that? Of course they're not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely, Paul. And and they're gonna, like you said, it'll be a jailbreak. They will beat you, they will hit you, they will hurt you. I've said it for years. Yeah. At least the consciousness of, we're out of time as usual, Paul. We've said plenty. You said plenty. My goodness. We're out of time, but at least the consciousness is rising. At least there's an awakening. At least there's a consciousness, a lift, and something's happening, Paul. At least, even if they're not going to break free, something's taking place, which is wonderful. Paul, thanks so much for joining me. It's fantastic. Anything else you want to say before you go?
No, I agree. I agree that people woke up enough to vote.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, for this to mean anything, it's going to take a long, hard fight.
Mm. As is any escape. Thanks, Paul. Yep. Thank you very much, Paul. So let me just say, go to paulcraigroberts.org, read Paul's pieces. Paul sends them to me. Very, very great and informative. Paul's telling you the news before it happens. Let me tell you. Paul's almost like a psychic, and he sees things coming down the timeline and tells us about it and warns us about it before they come. Fantastic work, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Thank you so much. I get some great feedback. People love you here, and they really do. I'll just flash up your book, Paul. I'm going to flash my book up as well, obviously. One of Paul's book is that Paul is a prolific author. A lot of people don't know that. Look at all Paul's books on paulcraigroberts.org. The Neoconservative Threat to World Order. Here we go. Washington's Perilous War for Hegemony. Paul Craig Roberts. Amazing books that Paul writes. And also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want to be updated. There's my book, got to say that, The Emergency Transformation of Human Beings as the Solution to the World's Problems. It's wakey time, ladies and gentlemen. And I've been warning everyone for years that if you can't grow a potato, or you can't stand on your own 2 feet, and you can't have clothes, food, warmth and shelter without the government as your mum and dad, if you can't get off their teats and they're your mummies and daddies, you're in big trouble. And I know I'm making a joke of a serious situation, but you've got to see the tragicomedy of it, in my opinion. And it is a big tragicomedy. So thank you all for joining me tonight. And all your comments will be welcomed, good and bad. I appreciate your courage to stand up to the Mafia EU. Been waiting for this for a long time. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.